Hello. It is a pleasure to join you for this chapter in the study of just holiness expectations. The title is quite a powerhouse of a phrase. It immediately suggests a rigorous intersection between ethics, divine standards, and the human response. In a philosophical context, this study leads us up the path to explore not just what is expected, but also the moral grounding for why such an expectation is considered just. So without further delay, let's get started.
Well, as a bit of a review, teacher can't start a class without touching base with the class before it. It became clear that there are four fundamental principles that the kingdom of God is predicated on. The first principle is the expectation of God to be as holy as He is. And notwithstanding that sounds almost impossible, it's fairly clear. The second principle is if you're not as holy as God justifiably expects, it's your responsibility to repent. You have to accept the responsibility for going through the process of accepting responsibility, of experiencing remorse, of repudiating all of the vices you've acquired, to seek the reconciliation, to yourself and other people, and to resolve to comply with God's just holiness expectations. That's the second one. The third one is the one we're talking about, and that's the Agapè one. The curious thing about this is that in the Greek language, when they tried to translate the Hebrew Bible into Greek, there was a quandary about how you translate the Greek word for love into the Hebrew word. Well, the Greek word for love meant this: you exist to meet my needs. Self-oriented. You don't meet my needs, guess what I get to do? I get to kick you to the curb. And I wonder how many relationships, spousal relationships, parental relationships, family relationships, friendship relationships, have all fallen apart because everybody expected the other person to meet their needs. And when you don't meet my needs, I don't have time for you anymore. So that was going to be an inadequate concept when we talk about the love of God. Now, how's a better person defined? It's defined in terms of these principles of Agapè. So the first one we talked about, the effects condition. Every action you undertake alters the configuration of the universe at large. Now that may seem, as Jay says, it may seem to be quite a statement, but if you think about ripples in a pool, you throw a rock into a pool, the ripples start working. Can you get the ripple back? No, you can't. It will proceed until it dissipates over time. It becomes less important. But if you look at it, every time I make a decision and I take an action, I have altered the configuration of the world at large. So now I become morally responsible for the effects that I put in motion in virtue of my action. So that's the effects condition. Tonight, Jesus is asked on a couple of occasions, well, probably a great many occasions, what are the two great commandments in the law? The first one, he says, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. The second one is equivalent to it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself, even if your neighbor is your enemy. Maybe we could say, especially if your neighbor is your enemy. Obviously, you don't understand how people hurt me. And so since they have hurt me, I have the right to hurt them at least as much as they've hurt me. And probably, since they've hurt me, or mine, I have a right to hurt them more than they hurt me. In fact, the Old Testament made the law. It said that an eye for an eye or tooth for tooth. Now, it sounds like revenge, doesn't it? But it was actually an attempt to get people to stop ratcheting up vengeance. If somebody harms you by taking your tooth out, you can only take one of their teeth out, not bust all of them out. Now, if I were thinking about it, and I were seeking vengeance, I think I would think that way. And I dare say that most of us are in that position. That was the reason for the question that was put to me. I am justified in hating my enemy. And Jesus says, no, you're not. And so there's this principle that comes forward, and Jesus articulates it quite well, I think. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Well, that sounds like a good idea, except obviously God doesn't know how hot I think that babe is. And if he would take that into consideration, he would really understand where I'm coming from. But no, he says that's not even good enough. I envision this thing as, get to your 50th wedding anniversary, and you go to your spouse and you say, I want you to know right now, I have never been unfaithful to you in all of these years. And she, oh, that's really nice. I really appreciate that. But the reason why I wasn't unfaithful to you is because I knew you'd take me for everything I got. And I know that I'd really like to keep all of our assets together, so that's the reason I have now committed adultery. Now, is that a very honorable reason not to commit adultery? And I'm thinking, no, not really, because I doubted you'd even make that kind of a confession, would you? Because you knew that the minute you made that confession, that you would probably be murdered. So what does Jesus mean? What does this love mean? And when he says, you can't even regard somebody in a demeaning way. You can't call somebody a fool even. Or a raga. None of you in here has called anybody a moron, have you? Idiot. And Jesus says, hey man, if that's where you're going, that it's just a step away from demeaning somebody to harming them. In some kind of way. And it may get to the extreme of murder. But if you don't demean people and you do not regard them as worthy of being demeaned, then you're not going to kill them. Because you can't get there from there. Same way with adultery. If you get the lust, just get rid of the lust, then the adultery can't happen. If you get over being greedy, stealing can't happen. So I start looking at my neighbor in another kind of a way. And I think, the universe is divided up into two things from my point of view. The universe is composed of things that are my stuff and the things that are not my stuff. And I don't have any right to any of the things that are not my stuff. Now, if I honor my neighbor by saying, I respect your stuff, including your dignity, then we've made a huge leap towards this notion of well-being. So the first principle, I have the moral duty to the holiness God expects of me to treat everyone, including my enemy, especially my enemy, with dignity and respect. Oh, I can do that all day long. What a bet. It's the hardest thing in the world to do, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I put this on the table. I'll bet you don't even regard yourself with dignity and respect. Or else you wouldn't do the stupid stuff you're doing. Stupid has a very obvious way of kicking us in the backside, doesn't it? Reality is really quite unforgiving. So we need to treat people with dignity and respect, even to the point that we do not regard them in any demeaning way. So that's the first principle of the neighbor condition. My neighbor deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, even if he's a jerk. Well, there's a second principle, and this one's a little more complicated. The second principle is that you have the holiness duty to be an advocate for things that are true, things that are right, and things that are good. What is it to be an advocate? It means that I am going to be, anybody got a synonym for advocate? I'm going to do my best
Representative?
to represent true, right, and good. I'm going to articulate its principles. I'm going to use it in order to achieve the third goal. And the third goal is that I'm going to be proactive in the reconciliation of all people to God and to each other. The reconciliation principle. Now you think of those three things together, and ever since I guess I figured out this configuration of those truths. How do you do all of those three at the same time? Treat even your enemy with dignity and respect. Certainly your friends and your family and those that are close to you, you're going to treat them with dignity and respect. But you also, the people that you're going to interact with, that you should show dignity and respect to, are not going to get true, right, and good right all the time, are they? And they're going to have opinions that don't correspond with your opinions. So what do you conclude based on that? Well, the first conclusion that I've always been tempted to make is, if we disagree, you're wrong. Well, I taught philosophy for 25 years, most of the time in prison. The one principle that I had an awful time trying to get them to believe was Nothing is true because you believe it. It gets somebody, I've even seen preachers do this. I managed to stay there without walking out, but I just believe this with all of my heart. Bam! Well, does it mean it's true? No, it just means that it's going to take an awful lot to get you to even think about the possibility you're wrong. Right. An advocate for things that are true, right, and good. So how do I deal with somebody who, I believe I with all my heart, and treat them with dignity and respect? How does that happen? Well, I found out that sometimes the best thing for me to do to treat them with dignity and respect is to leave. So I just come back. But I got to come back when the heat's down. Now, one of the things reality does, this affects condition, first one. If you have a false belief, reality is going to pummel you with it. Just look at where your life is dysfunctional. And if it's dysfunctional, there's something wrong with your interface with the reality that actually exists. And reality is not going to change to comply with your belief system. I'll take that bet all day long. Reality is stubborn. It will not alter to comply with your belief system. So now, when that crisis comes, because I treat my neighbor with dignity and respect, I'm going to be available to help them work through a false belief system. Well, I've believed this all my life, but it's just not working out for me. Well, duh. Of course it's not working out for you, because what's happening? You have a value system which is inconsistent with the way God has configured the universe. God has configured the universe in a moral way so that you comply with the parameters that God has put into the universe. That's true. There are a couple of ways of looking at truth. This way, the chapter in that book is the longest chapter. True. What is truth? Pilate asked Jesus, what is truth? Right? Jesus answered him. Now there's another place in John where he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh to the Father but by me. Did he really answer the question, what is truth? Well, I think there are three dimensions of truth. I don't know whether to call them distinctions or dimensions, but the first thing is what we call correspondence. And correspondence means that I speak so that anybody who hears what I have to hear will understand the configuration of the universe better. I have to use my words properly. I have to choose the proper word in the proper situation so that the other person who hears what I have to hear will understand how I perceive that universe. Now, they may or may not agree or disagree with me about what my opinion about the universe is, but if we can speak with precision and accuracy and get our language to correspond with the way the universe is, then we're going to improve each other because we will all understand the way the universe actually works. So that's called the correspondence theory of truth. You have to make your words correspond to the way the universe is actually created. Now, this drives me a little bit nuts because I think people hold me as hyper precise in the way I speak. I had one guy said that he had a hard time reading the book you're reading here because I used words that he wasn't accustomed to using. I had a guy in a philosophy class. He started taking the class. He was in it for good time, not for truth, but tried to give him truth anyway. Said, Mr. D, I've written down those words you've been using, and I looked them up in the dictionary. I can't find them. So what? I'm supposed to quit using them because you can't find them in your dictionary? And so my point was, maybe you ought to get another dictionary. Duh. We need to use our words precisely. And when you write something down or you speak something, think it through to the point where you say, this is what I'm willing to pay for. One of the things I used to say in class was, and I did it, and it just drove them nuts, I think. They would say something, and the more foolish it was, the more fun I had. They would say something, I write it up on the board. And then we'd start to examine what he wrote up on the board. And he said, well, that isn't what I meant. How am I supposed to know what you meant? That's what you said. Well, I didn't mean that. Well, please tell me how I'm going to know what you mean if you didn't mean that, and that's what you said. So my characterization of this is, I'm going to make you pay for everything you say. And that will force you to do what? Think more clearly about what it is you actually want to put out for other people. Because they may start to depend on what you say because they respect you in some respect or other. So they'll think, well, if his belief is different than my belief, then his belief is probably truer than my belief. But maybe neither one of us have a belief that's altogether true, right? That's why we discuss this, why we an advocate. So if my belief is out there, I'm going to advocate for my belief, but you're going to come at me with the second thing. The second thing is called the coherence theory of truth. Coherence theory of truth says that every true statement has to be logically consistent with every other statement you make. That's the hard part. And it's usually, that's the first place we go, is in my experience as a teacher. Anytime somebody goes something, then you've got a ready-made counterexample. Well, how do you account for this? Well, I learned a little bit about logic, but I find it interesting that most of us have built into our brains a theory of logic. Are you pretty good at identifying contradictions? Inconsistencies? See, God put it there because he wanted you to figure out what's not constitution of the universe is, but he also wanted you to understand how you dialogue with each other in order to bring each other closer to the truth. That brings us to a point, I think, and that is you have to be ready to concede that you've lost the argument. And I'll I'll bet there's not many people in this room or any other room who's willing to concede that they've lost the argument. They're going to go to their grave, notwithstanding that somebody's exposed a fallacy in their argument. Am I right about that? I'll break up a relationship before I will concede that I'm wrong. Hey, God looking down there, he says, I'm devoted to everything is true, right, and good. You don't seem to have any allegiance to any of them. Well, if you don't have any allegiance to true, right, and good, I don't know how God's going to help you. Because he's not going to make you think any other way. That's your job. So, theory of truth, correspondence, and coherence. Right is not synonymous with truth. Truth is a function of the way sentences are put together in order to characterize the construction of the universe. Right is the property of an action that you take. And an action is right if the action works within the confines of the way the universe actually operates. You do something that alters the universe in a positive direction, then that action is what? It's right. Now, if you act in such a way that you inhibit the universe from creating well-being, then the action is wrong. So right and wrong seem to be a function of actions. Good. True, right, and good. What is good a function of? Well, we talk about good people. We talk about good actions. We talk about good results, effects. So I think good means anything that whose effect is enhancing the well-being of the universe we live in. True, right, and good. So now I'm going to be an advocate for it. Now I'm going to understand all of that at any particular moment? No. Do I think maybe somebody else might have a better handle on that than I do? Well, I'm going to look for one. And if you're the, well, I'm going to say it. If you're the smartest one in the room, you're in the wrong room. Do you ever seek out somebody that's smarter than you are? You need to. The problem is there aren't very many smart people. Why? Because they won't listen for true, right, and good. And they will continue to operate their lives in a way that is incompatible with the way the universe is actually configured. And then they'll wonder why their life sucks. Well, duh. You might start where?
Listening.
Maybe I've made a mistake. Maybe my value system is wrong. Maybe my habit patterns need to be busted up. And so we need to get together with each other and advocate for things that are true and good while treating everybody with dignity and respect. And what happens when that happens? Reconciliation happens. We suddenly start deferring to other people. We give them the respect that they deserve. We are all looking for true, right, and good. And as a result, alienation disappears, and unity and fellowship occurs. That's the neighbor condition. Now, there's something that Immanuel Kant put on the table here, and I admire him for it because I think he stole it from Jesus. He said that you have no moral right to use anybody. How do you feel when somebody's using you, manipulating you, exploiting you? You hate it like, and you just want to deck them, right? You don't get to use me. Well, where did that value come from? Because you love your neighbor as yourself. So you're not going to put up with somebody using you. So what right do you think you have to use anybody else? You treat everybody with dignity and respect. There was a Gandhi, you all probably have heard him. I would recommend that you find the movie Gandhi. It's about 3 hours long, but it's worth every minute. I found it quite transformative. But during the course of his trying to interfere with apartheid in South Africa, he led a meeting in which somebody stood up in the crowd and said, we need to kill a few officers, and then they'll pay attention to us. And Gandhi's response was this. Remarkable. He says, I should say, the person who said we need to kill a few officials, he also said, I'm willing to die killing a few officials. Gandhi's response said this. For this cause, I too am willing to die. But there is no cause for which I am willing to kill. That struck me. Isn't there anything more profound than that? There is no cause for which I am willing to kill. And if you start looking at other people as worthy of being treated with dignity and respect, as interacting with them based on truth, goodness, and rightness, and achieving reconciliation, then revenge is out of the picture. Revenge has to go. Mm-hmm. And God says that. 12th chapter of Romans, if you need a biblical text. If your enemy hungers, feed him. Feed him. If your enemy's thirsty, give him something to drink. Mm-hmm. And in doing so, you will heap coals of fire on his head. Are we trying to torture him, or are we trying to awaken his conscience? And he says, you don't take vengeance. Vengeance is mine. Do not undertake my job. Your job is reconciliation. And I've done reconciliation, but there are some people who just refuse to be reconciled to the true, right, and good. So, here we have true right. We have dignity and respect, even your enemy. We have being advocate for true right and good. And we have being proactive in the reconciliation of all men to God and to each other. How much is God going to demand of each of us to do that? It's one of the hardest things. I mean, I have a person I was talking to last week is having a hard time in her workplace. There were just There were just people who were just downright mean, vindictive, manipulative. Waitress. How many tables you get? I don't know. I didn't get as many tables as you did. Trade schedules with me. Oh, well, I've got this really important thing I've got to do. I don't care. It's not my problem. Never heard anything like that, have you? I'm not going to cooperate with you because I don't regard you as worthy of dignity and respect. In fact, I'm going to undercut you every way I can, any way I can. She said, I'm supposed to love those people? I said, yeah. Well, then, is that an unjust expectation? Is that God making an unjust expectation when he says that I have to love my enemy? I don't think God's unjust. Do I? Well, I just told you I don't think he's unjust. So is that expectation unjust? Or does it rely on a level of maturity that I need to get to? I've got to get there. Am I there? I'm not there. What steps am I going to take to get there? Well, I have to love my neighbor as myself. How much slack do you like to be given if you're in a conflict with somebody? I'm willing to accept all kinds of slack, right? But I'm not willing to give anybody any slack. Now I can see God sitting up there saying, really, you hypocrite. You demand from somebody something you are unwilling to give to them. Now, there are all kinds of precautions we need to make. We can talk about enabling and all the rest of that. Usually enabling discussion is trying to justify our own belief that we need to abuse somebody. Not going to help them. They could have helped themselves, and that's the reason. I mean, I always had kind of a problem with that. How do somebody spend 18, 20, 30 years digging a hole, haven't had sense enough to put the shovel down, but then all of a sudden they realize the hole's so deep, they can't climb out of it. So now what's my agape responsibility when they're in that hole? Sorry about your luck, Jack. You dug the hole. Is that the way agape works? No. But if I'm going to help people in that situation, is it going to cost me anything? Yeah, it is. Am I willing to pay it? No, I'm not. And God's saying, really? The only thing I did to try to bring you to your senses was I died on the cross. To expose to you the kind of deviant person you are. And the last word on the cross was what? Well, it is finished, but the one before that.
Forgive them.
Father, forgive them. They have no clue what they're doing. They're grotesquely murdering the holiest man who ever lived. And I'll bet you anything you're going to have a nailing service here. I'll bet you anything that we need to understand that we were pounding the nails in them. If I'd have been in that mob, I'd have probably been crucified. We have no king but Caesar. Or I'd have been Peter in the garden. I don't know who that guy is. Hey man, you got me confused with somebody else. Or Pilate. I can't find any cause for a charge against you. Yeah, I'm gonna let him, I'll beat him. I'll beat him pretty hard and then I'll let him go. No. Beating him's not good enough. Or I'll sell him. For how much? 30 pieces of silver. You know, if that's a lot of money, that's not a lot of money. 30. Some of us will save our money just in case we might have a need for it at some time, a great need for it. But in time of crisis, that amount of money isn't going to be nearly enough.
Mm-hmm.
That church down there, they got a bequest from somebody, $250,000, and they wouldn't do anything with it. They just kept it in the savings account. Professor of mine was down there doing I call it a devival. Those are called a revival, but I'm not sure it was. So we can't spend this money. We may have a need for it. And his response was this: in the day of judgment, your great need, $250,000 isn't going to be enough.
Mm-hmm.
That's true, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
How much does it cost to buy off God? Well, you ain't. How do you pay God? You pay God with Agapè. That's how you pay Him.
Mm-hmm.
You treat people with dignity and respect. Advocate for things that are true, right, and good. And you're proactive in the reconciliation of all men to God and to each other. And when you get that done, you can quit.
Good stuff.